Have you ever noticed how college sports, beyond the thrilling games and, the rivalries, they seem to be right at the heart of so many bigger societal debates these days?
Oh, absolutely. It's way more than just wins and losses now.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about who won the championship. We're talking about how athletes get paid, even the very rules of competition, who gets to compete. These things are making headlines way beyond the sports page. And it makes you wonder, right? Are these arguments about college sports actually connected to even larger, fundamental questions about what holds our society together?
That's a crucial link, I think. Many might not immediately see it, but it's really central to understanding some of the most pressing political and cultural debates going on right now.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to take a deep dive into these fascinating connections. We're going to explore these ongoing discussions about what really constitutes civil society and how those ideas then directly influence the passionate efforts, particularly from the Trump administration and Republicans, to, save college sports, as they put it.
Right. So we're unpacking the different viewpoints, understanding the concerns driving them, and looking at the solutions being proposed.
Exactly. Trying to give you a clear picture of the core arguments without getting, lost in all the noise.
And to guide us, we've pulled insights from a really thought-provoking Reddit thread. It questions whether certain right-wing views actually undermine civil society.
Okay.
And then we'll contrast those points with detailed articles, official statements from conservative news outlets, policy organizations, basically laying out their specific vision and actions for college athletics.
Great. So let's start with that Reddit discussion. It seems to center on an argument from a user, the missing premise, who puts forward this core principle: elements that do not maintain or advance civil society should not be included in it.
Right. A pretty stark principle. And this user then applies that very specific logic directly to what they see as problematic conservative views and actions, particularly those leveraged by the Trump administration.
How so?
Well, they argue these things are actively sort of chipping away at the foundations of civil society itself.
Okay, so what's the first example they give?
Their first major point focuses on language, specifically what they characterize as xenophobic rhetoric and its consequences.
Okay.
The Reddit OP traces a direct line from Donald Trump's 2015 comments about Mexican immigrants. You might remember that, bringing drugs, crime, rapists, remarks to later actions, like ICE raiding churches.
So the argument is a direct link from words to actions impacting civil society.
Exactly. They view these raids, for instance, as a direct attack, but one that started with specific language. The broader argument is that this kind of speech can spark what they call democratic backsliding.
Democratic backsliding, like a slow erosion.
Yeah, a gradual wearing away of democratic norms and institutions, which, they argue, ultimately paves the way for more severe consequences, potentially even human rights abuses down the line. It asks, does this rhetoric help anyone, or does it just break societal bonds?
It really highlights that idea that words can have these profound long-term impacts on the social fabric, right?
Definitely. And building on that, the missing premise also takes aim at Project 2025's mandate for leadership.
Okay, Project 2025, that's the big policy initiative from the Conservative Heritage Foundation.
That's the one. And this document includes a line stating, our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought.
Not what we want, but what we ought. Okay, how does the Reddit user interpret that?
Well, the OP argues this phrasing pigeonholes liberty. It narrows it down into a very specific prescribed life path. Things like marriage, having kids, traditional family gatherings like Thanksgiving.
As opposed to
allowing for individual exploration, choosing your own path. The critique is that it defines liberty not as freedom to explore, but as freedom to do what's deemed correct or ought.
So the question becomes, does that specific definition enhance civil society, or does it actually restrict a key part of modern civil society, which often values individual autonomy?
That's the core of their critique on that point.
Yeah.
And it extends to how the administration interacts with institutions, too.
Like universities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The OP argues that actions like withdrawing federal grants, they mentioned Columbia University, facing a proposed $400 million withdrawal over alleged anti-Semitism concerns or demanding big governance changes, are essentially attempts to break these institutions.
And the argument is that universities are vital pillars of civil society.
Yes, as places for research, open debate, critical thinking. Now, it's important, the criticism presented isn't necessarily about addressing anti-Semitism itself, but rather the alleged motivation and the method. The claim from this Reddit user is that the deeper goal was to force universities to align with a specific ideology, which undermines their independence.
Got it. And there was one more point from this user.
Yeah, a specific take on the parents' rights movement. The OP characterizes this movement as rejecting pluralism.
Pluralism meaning the idea that society should embrace diverse views and lifestyles.
Right. Respecting diversity rather than insisting on one dominant view. And this user sees the movement often leading to calls for banning certain books or restricting kids' exposure to different ideologies rather than just broadly supporting parental autonomy in a diverse world.
So connecting it back, this perspective sees that movement as trying to sideline certain groups or ideas, thereby undermining the very pluralism they see as essential to civil society.
That's the argument laid out.
Okay. Now, as you might guess, that core premise, elements that don't maintain or advance civil society shouldn't be in it, that drew some strong reactions in the Reddit thread itself, right?
Oh, definitely. Strong pushback. Critics raised some significant concerns about where that logic could lead.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest worries, voiced by users like Tixes, was the slippery slope argument. The fear that excluding views deemed undesirable has historically led to terrible outcomes. Authoritarianism.
They gave examples.
Yeah, pretty stark ones, like the Ottoman Empire's Committee of Union and Progress targeting Armenians and Greeks as undesirable elements, or segregation laws in the American South. The fear is that defining who or what doesn't belong inherently risks heading down that authoritarian path.
That's a heavy concern. It really raises the question of subjectivity, doesn't it?
Exactly. Who gets to decide what maintains or advances civil society? Opponents argue that definition is inherently subjective. It's wide open to political bias. Any group in power could potentially use that logic to shut down dissent.
And others argued that democracy actually requires all views.
Yes. Several users emphasize that. A truly civil and democratic society needs to allow open debate of all views, even the really controversial or disagreeable ones. Trying to sideline certain beliefs, they argued, effectively disenfranchises the people who hold them.
It undermines the whole idea of open democracy.
Right. And, while the original poster clarified they meant excluding views, not people, critics shot back that, in practice, separating people from their deeply held beliefs is often impossible. It leads to the same risk of marginalization.
Okay, so that sets the stage, a really fundamental debate about what civil society even is and what belongs in it. Having unpacked that, well, it makes it clearer why something seemingly separate, like college sports, has become such a major battleground.
Precisely.
So now let's pivot. Let's explore how these same kinds of ideological principles underpin the conservative vision for college athletics and the specific actions they're taking to, as they frame it, save it.
Right. And looking at conservative sources like the Daily Signal or the Federalist, the language is quite stark. They see college sports at an existential turning point, facing potential destruction.
Existential destruction. That sounds serious. What's driving that fear?
It's not just one thing, it's several interconnected issues. But fundamentally, they see this uniquely American institution, one they believe cultivates key values, potentially losing its way, maybe even its charitable status, and just becoming another pro league.
And a big part of that crisis, they argue, is litigation, legal chaos.
Yeah, a lot of it stems from that. You have to think back. The NCAA used to have almost total control, but then came that landmark 1984 Supreme Court decision, NCAA versus Board of Regents of the University of Oklahoma.
Okay, what did that do?
It essentially said the NCAA couldn't act like a monopoly, particularly regarding TV rights back then. But it fundamentally weakened the NCAA's overall power to regulate everything. That opened the door, arguably, to today's more chaotic environment.
And more recent court cases haven't helped stabilize things from their perspective.
Quite the opposite, according to these sources. The 2021 Supreme Court ruling on name, image, and likeness, NIL payments, and other cases that have chipped away at NCAA transfer and recruiting rules have just added to the instability.
Which leads directly to this pay-for-play concern.
Exactly. They describe it as pay-for-play bidding wars. The idea behind NIL was legitimate endorsements, right? But these sources report it's devolved into university boosters, basically engaging in direct bidding for athletes.
Wow. Are there numbers associated with that?
Yeah, some pretty staggering ones alleged. Some programs supposedly spending over $50 million a year just on football rosters. One projection mentioned was $35–40 million for a single team in 2025. They argue this is completely off the rails.
And the worry isn't just about football and basketball.
No, a major concern is the threat to non-revenue sports and women's sports. Think track and field, swimming, gymnastics. These programs often rely on subsidies from the big moneymakers, like football.
So if all the booster money is flooding into football,
Then the financial viability, the very future of these other sports comes into serious question. That's a huge concern from this perspective.
okay, so money and competition. What about the status of the athletes themselves?
That's another big one. The erosion of amateur status. There was a proposal, later rescinded, from the Biden-era National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, to classify college athletes as employees.
And the conservative view is that this would be disastrous.
Yes, they see it as threatening to completely eradicate the charitable status of college sports. And why that matters is crucial. It would likely decimate tax-deductible donations, which are the lifeblood for many, many athletic programs.
And adding to all this complexity is different states doing different things.
Right. Over 30 states have passed their own, often conflicting, NIL laws. This creates what they call a race to the bottom. States trying to outcompete each other with looser rules to attract athletes.
Which leads to more instability and potential exploitation.
That's the argument. It creates a messy patchwork, risks exploiting athletes, and makes competitive balance even harder to achieve.
Okay, so given this picture of, well, chaos and existential threat, what are the Trump administration and Republicans actually doing about it?
They frame their actions as vital steps to preserve this uniquely American institution. One they believe builds character, leadership, work ethic, that competitive spirit.
So what are the concrete actions?
A really key one is the Save College Sports Executive Order. President Trump signed this on July 24, 2025. It tries to tackle several of these issues head-on.
Like what specifically?
Well, first, it requires preserving and even expanding scholarship and competition opportunities for women's sports and those non-revenue sports we just talked about.
Okay, addressing that funding concern. What else?
It directly prohibits third-party payments. But importantly, it still allows legitimate brand endorsements at fair market value. So trying to draw a line there.
Trying to get back to the original intent of NIL, perhaps.
That seems to be the goal. It also directs the Secretary of Labor and the NLRB to clarify the status of student-athletes, specifically not as employees, to protect those non-revenue sports and their educational focus.
Ah, so codifying the stance against classifying athletes as employees.
Exactly. It formalizes an earlier move by Trump's NLRB General Counsel, which had already rescinded that Biden-era order.
What else is in that EO?
It tells the Attorney General and the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, to take action to protect athletes' rights and shield college sports from, quote, endless antitrust and other legal challenges. And it mandates consulting with the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic teams.
Why the Olympic teams?
To protect college athletics' role as a pipeline, basically. A huge number of Team USA athletes come up through the college system.
Got it. Now, there was another executive order mentioned specifically about women's sports.
Yes, an earlier one aimed specifically at keeping men out of women's sports, framed as ensuring equal opportunities for female athletes.
And this had follow-on effects.
It certainly seems so. After that order, 28 Republican attorneys general, led by Mississippi's Lynn Fitch, publicly urged the NCAA to strip biological male athletes. Leah Thomas being the most prominent example cited of any records or titles won in women's competitions.
And their reasoning?
Their argument was clear. Women were negatively impacted and unfairly disadvantaged due to inherent biological advantages, and those honors should go to the female athletes they competed against.
A very direct stance. Did the NCAA respond?
Well, the NCAA did update its policy. It now limits women's sports competition to athletes assigned female at birth only. Sources report this shift was influenced by Trump's executive order.
And the Olympics?
The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee also effectively banned biological men from competing as women, citing an obligation to comply with that same order. So, significant policy shifts there.
Beyond executive actions, is there movement in Congress?
Yes, there's proposed legislation. Republican Representative Gus Bilirakis introduced the SCORE Act that stands for Student Compensation and Opportunity Through Rights and Endorsements.
The SCORE Act, what's the main goal there?
Its main goal is to give intercollegiate athletics an antitrust exemption.
An antitrust exemption, like Major League Baseball has.
Exactly like that. MLB has had one since the 1920s. The idea is this would give governing bodies, like the NCAA or maybe a successor, special legal protection.
Protection to do what?
To make rules, regulate NIL, transfers, all of it, more effectively, without constantly facing lawsuits arguing they're acting like an illegal monopoly or cartel. It aims to stop the endless litigation.
And prevent college sports from becoming fully professionalized.
Yes, explicitly. The bill aims to stop it becoming a unionized, for-profit, professionalized system and would clearly state that student-athletes are not employees. It's about preserving that amateur model, or at least a version of it.
Okay, so specific actions on sports, but you mentioned earlier this connects to a broader critique of higher education from conservatives.
Absolutely. If you look at these conservative sources, the discussion about sports often sits within a larger critique of universities themselves. They talk about profound ideological bias.
How so?
They often describe campuses as sanctuaries for student activism and progressive ideology, pointing frequently to the growth of diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI programs as evidence.
And they back this up with data.
They often cite surveys suggesting a strong left-leaning skew among faculty members, like over 80% identifying as left-leaning, under 5% conservative in many fields.
And this perceived bias is then linked to
declining public confidence in higher education overall. And crucially, it's presented as part of the justification for federal intervention, including things like threatening grant withdrawals, as we discussed with Columbia.
So the argument is almost that universities brought some of the scrutiny on themselves by becoming too ideologically uniform or out of step?
That's essentially the argument presented, that these institutions have, in a way, strayed from a core educational mission or broader societal values, necessitating intervention to realign them.
It's a fundamental belief from their perspective that these institutions need correction.
Yes, that intervention is needed to bring them back into what they see as the proper alignment.
Wow. Okay, bringing all these threads together, what we've really done today is a pretty complex deep dive.
We definitely navigated some complex territory.
We started by exploring that fundamental debate about what should even be included in civil society. We heard one perspective from that Reddit thread, viewing certain actions and rhetoric as undermining core principles like liberty, pluralism.
Right. But alongside that, we also heard those strong counter-arguments, the fears about slippery slopes, subjectivity, and the need for all viewpoints in a democracy.
Exactly. Then we pivoted. We examined how these larger ideological clashes play out directly in the conservative vision for the future of college sports.
Yeah, looking at how actions like President Trump's executive orders, the proposed SCORE Act, they're all aimed at tackling what they see as genuine crises in college athletics.
Right. Everything from the financial pressures, those pay-for-play worries, to the really intense gender equity debates about who gets to compete in women's sports.
It really puts it all into context.
It does. And this whole conversation, I think, really highlights how deeply different interpretations of fundamental concepts, words like liberty, fairness, even the basic purpose of institutions, how those differences lead to vastly different policy approaches.
Absolutely. Understanding these specific proposals, like the EOs or the SCORE Act, it helps you get a much better handle on the intricate political landscape today.
And the high stakes involved, right, for the institutions that shape so much of our culture and frankly, educate our future leaders.
No question, the stakes are incredibly high.
So maybe a final thought to leave folks with as you consider all these varying perspectives we've unpacked. What responsibility do individuals and maybe institutions too truly have in defining and upholding civil society when the definitions themselves are so fiercely debated?
That's a deep question, and maybe tied to that. What happens when one side genuinely believes its views are absolutely essential for a thriving civil society, while another side believes those exact same views are actively tearing it down? Where do you go from there?